Now we are going to explore how the Powhatans lived at the Chesapeake. Powhatans lived in Yihakans. These homes were built by the Powhatan women. The women would use saplings and bend them in order to make a U shape to frame the house. Yihakans were 50 to 60 feet long. The insides were furnished with platforms and animal skins. There was always a fire burning in the center of the Yihakan. Smoke was ventilated through a small hole in the ceiling. There were 2 small doors at either end of the Yihakan. The life source for each tribe was the nearest creek or river. They fished in these bodies of water as well as drank from them. They traveled by water in canoes called quintas. The canoes were 4 feet deep and 50 feet long. They could hold up to 40 men. These were used to transport goods, equipment, and food, much like a car today. The quintans were made from cypress trees. The trees were cut down by burning and chipping away at the log until it fell. They would then burn and chip away at one end until they could fashion the desired shape. The shape was either flat or a V shape at the bottom. The men in the tribe played a vital role to the community. They hunted deer, turkey, fished for crabs, oysters, and fish. Most common fishing methods were angling, netting, shooting with arrows, and trapping with weirs. Angling was done with rods, lines, bait, and fish hooks. Fish hooks were bone that were either splintered or naturally hook-shaped. Men from the shore would lasso fish around the tail. Fish nets were made from pimina, which women spun. The Indians would be very creative when trapping fish. From spearing to tying lines to arrows, one of the most creative ways involved placing rocks in a V shape downstream so that when fish swam into the V trap, the current was so strong they couldn't get back out. Hunting played a major part in the Powhatan society. It provided clothing, food, and was a way for young men to prove their worth. Trapping was used for smaller game, such as beavers or otters. When hunting deer, lone hunters would wrap themselves in deerskin and disguise themselves as a deer in order to get close enough to make the kill. Women of the tribe very much held together the community. They performed jobs such as gathering firewood and food. They made pottery, mats, wooden spoons, and many other needed items. They also made clothes, farmed, and raised the children of the tribe. When moving, they carried all the equipment so that the men were ready to fight off enemy tribes at all times. The 3 main crops that were cultivated were corn, beans, and squash. The women did the cooking for the tribe. They would cook from a community pot that was placed on the fire pit. It was constantly replenished throughout the day with food. There was not a set mealtime, so people ate when they liked. Women were well respected within the Powhatan society. If a man wanted to marry a woman, he would have to prove himself worthy. He would have to display that he could provide and protect a woman. By presenting her parents with gifts and food and other necessary items, he would prove that he was able to take care of her. He would have to pay her parents bride's wealth as compensation for their loss in labor. Men that could not meet up to the expectations of the women in the tribe were viewed as incompetent and held little respect. You must be able to provide food for yourself and your family in order to marry a woman of the tribe. They saw the Europeans as unable to provide for themselves, therefore not worthy men in their eyes. Education of children in Powhatan was very unorthodox compared to today. Other members of the tribe would tell stories and myths to enhance their knowledge of the Powhatan. When the boys with great potential were 10 to 15 years of age, they would be sent on Haskana. This was a ritual that lasted 9 months and included isolation, fasting, and medicine that resulted in hallucinations. It was an extremely daunting task, but when the boys returned to the tribe, they were viewed as men. girls followed their mothers at an early age and learned the necessary jobs to perform at their own pace. The beauty and fashion of the Powhatan was very much elaborate and represented stories or achievements of a certain individual. Practically, men would shave part of their head so that their hair did not interfere with the bowstring. Men proudly wore items from a mighty animal they had killed to show off how great of hunters they were. Each piece of jewelry or decoration told a story about that hunter. Tattoos were also a sign of beauty and achievement. Different designs would be printed into the skin to represent the nature of the person or some achievement. Clothing was as elaborate as the individual was wealthy. Some had different animal skins they wore, whilst others had simple coverage. Children under 12 wore no clothes during the hot months. The Powhatans believed in many gods. Every aspect of their life related to one or more of their gods. Every morning began with a bath, a prayer, and an offering to their gods. Their priests, or kiwaskua, were highly respected as medicine men, priests, and tribal counselors.
In 17th century England, women and children were legally the wards of their husbands and fathers. Men were supposed to be the sole economic support. Women and children were legally defined as chattel, which is a slave or property of goods. They were expected to obey their husbands or fathers without question. Wives and children could not manage their own property unless special legal provision was made. If they were disobedient, their consequence was often corporal punishment. Religion was another area of conflict. To the Powhatans, religion was a part of their daily lives. Every aspect of their routine was begun with a prayer and offering. They easily expected the idea of Christian deity to worship along with their own gods. The English were confused and angered when the Powhatans would not give up their other gods. They were determined to convert the Powhatans to Christianity. Some of the behaviors and characteristics the Powhatans found disgusting about the English were their unwillingness to bathe regularly and their speed at giving advice. They were also thought the English men were fools for being the sole providers of food for their families, also leaving the fort unprepared in an event of an attack. The Powhatans also laughed at the English spoon. They thought it was too small and that it was too much work needed to use it. The English wanted to train the Powhatans to be English citizens. The Powhatans saw only a life of short-term servitude, and they were unwilling to expose their children to a new way of life.
The first recorded contact of Europeans with the Powhatans occurred sometime between 1559 and 1561, when a Spanish exploration party captured a Powhatan boy. It was the practice of European explorers to kidnap adolescents who could easily learn a new language and remember their own, therefore becoming valuable interpreters. On September 10, 1570, Jesuit missionaries arrived in Tidewater, Virginia. They sailed up the river, later named the James River after English King James I. After crossing the lower peninsula by way of creeks, they reached the York River where they set up a mission. What caused the First Anglo-Powhatan War? I'll tell you. The First Anglo-Powhatan War was the result of Lord de la Warre's order to George Percy on August 9, 1610. Percy and 70 men went to the capital town of Powhatan, where the English killed or injured 50 or more people and captured the wife of Wawinkapunch, the warrants of her children. After returning to their boat, the Englishmen killed the children by throwing them overboard and shooting them in the water. The killing of women and children was not tolerable in Powhatan warfare. It greatly affected Powhatan and his people. The Powhatans never recovered from this and appeared to have merged with other chiefdoms. Why was determined to get rid of the English? Was a powerful and aggressive warrants. He had a strong dislike and distrust for the English. Resentment can probably be traced to a time when John Smith seized him, put a pistol to his chest, and led the trembling king, near dead with fear, amongst all his people, an unforgivable insult to the warrior of royal status.